Welcome to today's social system mapping on-ramp session for April 12th, 2021. Your hosts today are me, Christine Capra, and Kara Martiner, admin support, and also Tim Hansen is with us, my partner in all things. And today we're gonna, well, for those of you, for those of you who don't know, I think most of you do though, we have three public community practice sessions a month. Today we're doing our OnRamp, which is a basic intro level session to just see somebody else's map and hear about their process and ask them questions. Today, David Ehrlichman is going to share the Ignite Philanthropy map. So third Monday of the month, same time, we do a deep dive conversation. I think next week's is going to be really interesting. Sarah Shanahan is going to host it with me. And we're going to talk about ways of visualizing funding flows. So this is not something that any of us have ever actually done in a big way, but we're all kind of fascinated by the potential of it. And so we thought we'd just share our thoughts and ideas about what could be visualized and how might we get at that, because yeah, it's a touchy subject and it would be pretty powerful if we could go there. The fourth Monday of the month, we have a tech talk, and the next one is going to be, since we're taking, we had this little pause in between shifting around our survey update thing, which you heard about last tech talk if you were with us. We just had Alex do a quick input of a ability to edit CSS. So you can now change colors and fonts and things like that on the front end of sumApp. And so we'll talk about how to do that in 2 weeks, the next tech talk. So we have a lot of ways of learning more about social system mapping and getting going. Kara has been putting links to everything I'm saying in the chat. So if you want to catch those right now, go ahead. But she'll also follow up in an email within the next 48 hours with all of these links as well. So if you don't feel like grabbing them right now, that's just fine. But there's a number of ways of getting more info, and including recordings of recent sessions. These kinds of sessions. I have an office hours on Thursdays, and where you can just jump in and ask me questions or just chat. And so for today, we're going to do chat intros in a second. We're going to have David present his map. Then we'll have some open time for questions and answers. And for those of you who are new to this, we have a formal hour conversation, and then at the top of the hour we stop, and people who need to go on with their days or evenings jump off at the top of the hour and we say goodbye. And then, but anybody who just has more questions or wants to just have an informal conversation about something, just stick around, and we have this optional post-session half hour that you're invited to stay with if you have time and the inclination. So in our chat, let's go ahead and have you write in the chat your name, pronoun, location, so we can all see who's here with us and where you all hail from. So we have a couple of Seattle people, California, Boulder, Belgium, and Munich, and Virginia, middle of France, Bay Area. Amelia, you're in Minneapolis. Tim and I are in Minneapolis also. And Kara is in St. Paul. Zurich. So we have some all over. Okay, and then let's put in the chat just one primary network that you are part of or working with as a consultant, a network that you're involved in and care about. This is always really fascinating and encouraging to see all the different things that people are working on, like donut economics and outdoor learning for students. And I don't know what that means, Reiner. And water protection and children in nature and a just economy, all really, really important. Internet governance, cool. Yeah, so we're all working on really important things at the edges of transition, hopefully into new ways of organizing and being. And so that's a fundamental assumption that I always have when we come together, is that we are all trying to make serious systemic change, and appreciate all of the work that all of you are doing. Then the last thing for the chat is, what brings you here today? It might be a problem you're looking for a solution for. It might be a friendship. It might be a curiosity about David's map. Habitual login. See, that's a good reason. It makes me feel like I've got company seeing the same faces over and over. It's nice. Learning. Yep. Nice. Interesting. Yeah. It's a good group to connect with. Okay. I'll do this really quickly for those of you who aren't familiar with how a social system map is the parts that it's comprised of. The map itself, what David will be showing you itself, lives in a platform called Kumo, which is an online interactive graph network data visualization platform that anybody can have free public maps in. You just set up an account, the account's free. You pay a little if you want to keep them private. But so Kumo is what we're looking at the data in. But sumApp is how we're gathering the data. So sumApp is the software system, or the software tool that Tim and I built. Actually, we hired people to build, but that gathers data from networks in a way that is designed to be as easy as possible for as large a networks, up to 1,500 people. So sumApp gathers the data. So we've got a little survey thing to get information about your individuals, and then we've got a part that gets information about the relationships of all the individuals in the network. And then all of that data, we have a link that just puts it automatically, freshly updated as in real time into Kumu. And then Kumu is visualizing the data. This is where most of the technical skill comes in, is just setting up your maps and filtering them in ways that are useful for your community. And then once you've got your map set up in Kumu, you can take the embed link from Kumu and put it back into a specific page in sumApp, so that when your community members go into sumApp, they both can input their data in sumApp, but then they can also see and interact with the map in sumApp. So they don't have to go to two places. Your users don't have to know that there are two tools being used. But in learning about how this all works, that's a fundamental basic thing to know is there's two tools going on. So having said all that, I'm going to let David walk you through his. And so David is the co-founder and coordinator of the Converge Network, and author of a new book coming out in October about called Impact Networks, about networks, obviously. And this is one of his client maps that he's going to share with you. And I will just hand it over to you, David. Let me stop sharing.
All right. Thank you, Christine. Hi, everybody. Nice group we have here. Many of you have met before and some new. So nice to see all of you, or see your names on here. Yeah, I'll be sharing a map today that really covers the childhood sexual abuse and exploitation ecosystem, groups working to end violence against children globally. And I'm going to start sharing my screen, and then we'll share a little bit more background about it. So I guess a little bit about me first. As Christine said, I'm co-founder and coordinator of the Converge Network. I've been working with networks for over 10 years. And mapping has been one part of that work throughout. It's not the primary focus of my work. The primary focus of my work is connecting people together, hosting, designing convenings, and developing the infrastructure that networks need to bring multiple stakeholders and organizations together to tackle larger issues that they can't address alone. But in that work, how do we evaluate how the network is growing and evolving? How do we identify key points of intervention that we can incorporate into convening designs or conversations about how to best increase connectivity and information flow across the network? And how can we identify strategies for weaving, for connecting people together who aren't already connected? That's all done through mapping. And so whenever I'm working with a network, in almost every case, we'll do a baseline survey with sumApp, capture the information before people have really had a chance to formally connect in terms of the network, and then follow up at regular intervals. And sumApp has made it really easy to do that because it allows people to go back into their unique survey link and update the information that they filled out before. So they don't need to do an entirely new survey from scratch. They see the icons of all the people that are in the network that they could connect to, rate their connectivity. And then as the network grows, we can actually show that evolution in the maps. Then there's another side of it, which is the actual use case for the participants themselves, not just the coordinators and facilitators. And in that way, I think of it sort of like an asset map, really understanding who else is in the network, what kinds of areas of knowledge or focus they have, what kinds of functions, capacities, what everybody else is bringing to the table, and who, what they have that I could connect with them. We could work together to support something larger or support each other's work. Now, this particular network is a little different in that this is not actually a network that I've been working with directly in supporting its growth and evolution. This was one that was just contacted me with interest of developing a map. And it's also a little bit different because this network is really in its earlier stages. It's really a very nascent network. The groups haven't been brought together in intentional ways. This was really a first attempt to even make sense of this ecosystem of different groups and organizations working to end childhood sexual abuse and exploitation around the world. And then to share this map back with them so they could understand what the other organizations and networks are in this space, who's bringing what skills and capacities to the table, and use it to then connect with one another. And to understand how these groups are already connected or working together to form the basis for ongoing support for the network to continue to build this ecosystem and strengthen the connectivity and the flow of information and collaboration across it. So that's the basis of this. I want to show what this map contains, how the groups are using it, allow a lot of time for questions at the end. So happy to do that. I think the first thing I'll share here is the first challenge was who is going to be involved in this map. So as I said, it wasn't really a formal network at this point. So a lot of time initially was spent figuring out who are the groups who are going to be surveyed and included. And we actually did some pre-surveys for that, reaching out, seeing if people were interested, getting to know who else they're already working with, kind of building out the participant list at the beginning. So that was the first challenge, which took quite a bit of time, understanding who was going to be a part of it and how to contact them. And then of course, then it came to the actual surveying and map development part. And then it's shared back out with the network so that they can use it. This is, one particular view. This is a view that really only I'm seeing and then you're seeing. And this map is modified, I will say, a bit from what they have. I've removed some personal identifying information, including the names of these different organizations to protect their privacy. The actual map view that they're seeing is what's called the Kumu presentation view, which is able to walk them even more specifically, kind of step-by-step of how to use this map. And it has its own password protection, which, just side note, that's a good way to make a Kumu map password protected without paying for their private map tier. So this is a free version of the map, but it's also password protected using their presentation feature. That's just a little tip that I've found to be useful. But here in our view here, you can see a little bit of information on the left just about how groups are connected. And just to orient you to what's here, there's a couple of views I'll show. This view really has everything. It has all the information that we captured from these different organizations and networks in terms of what their organization type is. Are they an international NGO, a local NGO, a network coalition, their cohort, areas of knowledge or focus. Again, this was also quite a bit of the pre-work, is really getting to a discrete list that folks could choose from to identify the areas of knowledge or focus. It, again, was part of that pre-survey because it's tempting to just have it be open-ended and people add in all the different things that they're bringing to the table, but that makes it really hard then to make sense of in the Kumu map to filter. It's much more helpful to have a discrete list that people can choose from. And so we got to that, various areas of knowledge or focus, and I'll dive into these in a second. Functions and capacities, again, same kind of process. Advocacy priorities. This one actually started as an open-ended question in that pre-survey, and then we boiled it down to a discrete list. So all the different ways that they're working to end childhood sexual abuse and exploitation, the different stakeholders and communities that they're working with or connected to, and then their geographic focus. And we also see how they're connected with one another. I'll get to that in just a second. So in terms of, you could say the asset map part of it, there's a separate view just for that. It removes the connectivity, but I'll keep on this main view just for simplicity. So these organizations and networks, again, they don't know each other very well for the most part, but they're able to come into this map and normally they'd be labeled. They'd see who these different groups are and say, I'm really looking for somebody who's working in the child early and forced marriages space. And so it filters out all the groups except for those working in that particular area of knowledge or focus. And then you can boil it down even further and say, I'm interested in both that and folks who are working globally. And so from that initial network of however many, come to these 7 different elements, and they're able to click on any of these and then see a lot more information here on the left about their work, contact information, etc., which I'm going to hide for the most part. So that's the way that they can actually then connect directly with one another, understanding I'm looking for this specific thing. Now I can see these different groups. I can click on them and learn a lot more about their work. That's really how people then are meant to use that part of the map. But there's also a connectivity portion. As I said, the network and the organizers of this network were interested in understanding how groups were already connected with one another so that they could then start to strengthen the network more intentionally. So that's here on this connectivity filter, and surveyed them on a scale of 0 to 3. 0 is, I'm not connected with this group, I don't know them. 1 is communicating. We communicate with one another on issues related to CSAE. For example, we share information, ideas, or data. 2 is we're coordinating. We coordinate our efforts to advance shared goals related to CSAE. Our efforts are closely connected, but we maintain separate resources and responsibilities. And 3, collaborating. We collaborate together to advance shared goals related to CSAE. We work in partnership sharing resources, and making shared decisions. I've used this scale or slight modifications of this scale in a number of different places, and it's tended to work pretty well, especially when it comes to organizations or networks connecting together. When it's just individuals connecting directly with one another, sometimes groups are more interested in kind of the depth of relationship or the degree of trust that we have with one another. But it's hard to measure relationship or trust, these more nebulous type things, when it comes to organizations or networks where there are multiple different individuals that are part of these different groups. So the key is really trying to make the scale as objective, as specific as possible, giving examples in each of those levels is really helpful for what you mean by them. And what I like about a scale like this is that it brings in different ways that people might be working together. Right? It's not just about what's our relationship with one another or the strength of our connection, but also how are we communicating? Are we coordinating? Are we collaborating? And you can see then how that evolves as the network evolves. So let's dive into that here. So if we just look at the groups who are communicating with one another, you can select that on the filter and see that with the orange lines. And then we can add in who's coordinating. And who's collaborating with one another, the purple. So what was interesting is, you can see that even though this network hasn't really been formally supported, there's already activity, there's collaborative activity in this ecosystem. That's really important information for folks who are then going to support this network. Who are the people who are hubs, who are really well connected, who are collaborating with a lot of different groups? Who are the folks who have no connections with anybody else? And we've identified them in a pre-survey as an important part of this ecosystem, but they're really isolated from the rest of this network. So how do we support them to then become connected with others and find those synergies? You can see more here. And with sumApp, specifically with the tier 3, we're also able to, the tier 3 level of sumApp, we're also able to ask not just to what degree we're connected, but also how, able to add that second question in the connectivity scale of how are we actually working together? So add a description. Not everybody did that. Let's see if one of these will show up. Here we go. So in this particular case, you can see more information about how they're actually working together.
David,
we can click, yep.
Just want to say there's some questions in the chat related to connections. Is this a good?
Sure, go ahead.
So, Rebecca wanted to know if the connection question options are check all that apply.
The connectivity scale, no, it's just check one. And that's a challenge for some people because of course you're communicating, or if you're coordinating, you're also communicating. But the intention of this scale is that they build on one another.
Mm-hmm. And then Brian wanted to know, did you create the connections through clustering? And this is a really key question that comes up a lot.
Can you explain what you mean by clustering?
Brian, do you want to ask? Or do you want, yeah, go ahead.
In Kumo, they've got a feature called cluster where you define a tag or some other thing, and then everything that is of that tag gets clustered together. And it's a function. So you purposely choose to do that. So is that what you used, or did you go one at a time and connect people?
No, actually, I haven't used the clustering function, and I didn't go one at a time either. Really, I just took the data that came in through sumApp, and then created these weighted lines based on that information. So that's the connections part of the sumApp survey.
Oh, sumApp did it. Okay.
Yeah. So Brian, I just want to, so Brian, this is a place that's often really confusing for people is if you use the cluster so that you're clustering around an attribute of the individuals, Kumu does that. It looks a lot alike, and it's a kind of connection, but we distinguish between that as a potential connection, because just because you have an attribute in common doesn't mean that you actually have a living connection. And the connections tab in sumApp is precisely about asking, do you have a living connection? Can you identify, yes, I know Brian, yes, I know Reiner, yes, I have a relationship with Nick. So that's the piece that people will often say, well, I can get at all of that, I don't need sumApp. But in fact, if you want to ask people themselves, so like one of our customers, Drew, calls those validated connections. They're reported by the individuals as things they're aware of, as opposed to, I live on the same block with the guy, I should know him, doesn't mean I necessarily do. So this is, but so when you're in Kumu, if you're looking at a cluster, if it's agents at the center and around, then it probably came from something like sumApp, probably sumApp. Yeah, that can be really confusing. In the beginning, I had long conversations with people talking about connections and us just not getting what it's like. I don't know, like not lining up. So, okay, sorry. Yeah, and then David, Rebecca had a question, or choose the highest. Yeah, so that answered. You got that answered. And then Katie, did you want to just comment on yours, or should I?
Well, I just pointed out that it's the shape of the network is interesting and looks just a little bit unusual. And David, I was wondering in this case, what explains the kind of isolated couple of satellite clusters?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is interesting. Hi, Katie. Good to see you or hear from you.
Hey, you too.
I'm not, what explains it? The leaders of this network would know more than me, but I presume that it's because this is a really nascent network and they haven't done a lot of intentional work to build the connections across. That is a really important thing to point out, and a really important finding for them is that there are these two major clusters here of folks who are working together or are connected. And at this point, it's unclear to me why they're like that, but that is a really kind of light bulb moment, I think, for the organizers and supporters of this network. How do we actually bridge these clusters together? Because it seems like there's kind of two different groups that are working on these issues. So I would look at the folks in particular who are, have overlap in terms of their advocacy priorities. So I would, have recommended them to kind of dive into this data and see if there are groups within each one of those clusters that have a shared advocacy priority but aren't connected with one another already, and then actually do the work to make the introduction between them. That's when connections are really useful, and when people, it's more than just kind of an introduction, just you should know about this person, but when network coordinators or weavers really go that extra mile to say, and you're working on this similar issue and you're working in the same region, you actually have some overlap and potentially some ability to support each other's work. So strengthening those connections. You can also see there, it looks like there's sort of a third cluster over here, even though there's some lines of communication between these two groups. There's a lot more activity in this cluster on the lower right as there is in the big one in the lower left. And so I'd be looking at those groups who are already communicating with one another and understanding if there's a way that they could deepen their connection with maybe other groups here. And then of course, there are some isolated nodes who aren't connected with anybody. How do we weave them in with the rest of the network? So I can't speak too much about the why, because I haven't been so intimately connected with this network, but it's a really important finding here. Yeah.
So I'm sorry, John, I interrupted you. Whatever you were going to say.
Oh, great. No, I appreciate those questions. That's the best part of this. So just a couple other things I wanted to point out here. One is as I said, there are a couple of views. They wanted to make it easy for their users to just be looking at the asset map part of it, and not looking at the connectivity side as much, and then having that in a separate view. So we're just thinking about the connections. And one kind of important distinction here, if I go back, you'll see that there are some nodes that don't have an icon. Those are the individuals who are identified as being important to this ecosystem and were sent a sumApp survey, but didn't actually fill out the survey to this point. And that's ongoing, but to this point, they have not filled out a survey. So for the asset map portion of it, they wanted to hide those groups who hadn't filled out that information, because then the rest of it is sort of irrelevant. And I was able to do that by filtering out just a little behind the scenes in Kumu here in the filtering out last date, which is a column that comes from sumApp about when people have actually completed their survey. So if I'm saying we're filtering out, we're ignoring all the groups who don't have a last date of entry, then we're filtering out all the groups who haven't completed their survey. That's how we removed those particular groups. But then for the connections view, the view that does include these different connections, they actually wanted to include the groups who may not have filled out a survey, but somebody else said that they are connected with them in some way. So that way I had to add, we're not only filtering out groups who haven't filled out a survey, also groups who haven't filled out a survey and those with a degree of less than 1, which means groups who don't have any connections. Degree is the number of connections, both incoming and outgoing. So if they have 0 connections and they haven't filled out a survey, then they're removed from the map. If only one of those are true, they're remained on. So groups who haven't filled out a survey but have at least 1 degree of connection, they remain on this view. Groups who have filled out a survey but have no connections, they also remain on this view. So that was an important way to include just the groups that they were interested in showing. I think, not sure how much else I can share at this point. I guess the SNA metrics are an important piece here. You can see them at the bottom. That's just a bit of code that you can add in Kumu. And let me show what that looks like. Right here, you can add just this tiny snippet of code, bottom, :SNA dashboard, end colon. If you add that, it creates this SNA dashboard at the bottom here, which totals the number of elements, the number of connections. If I add in all the groups who are connected here with one another, we can see in total 82 connections of any level, the density, the percentage of actual connection, of all possible connections that are actual connections, and so on. And this is important because this, in effect, is a baseline map for this network. This is kind of a survey that was conducted before this network has really been intentionally cultivated. And so they want to know how then the network evolves and grows and strengthens its connections over time as they begin to focus on it more intently. And so we would be then looking for those different metrics to change over time. Particularly, we would want density to go up. And you want connections to go up, perhaps average degree as well. And with a follow-up survey, which they're planning on doing 6 months from now, maybe a year from now, they would include time tags in sumApp so that then you would be able to actually show in the same map how it was at the earlier point in time, April 2021, and then how it was at the winter point in time, December 2021. And it would show that evolution, and you'd also see the change in these SNA metrics. So I think I'll stop there and just open up to conversation and questions, and we'll dig deeper in that way.
Cool. Thank you, David.
Sure.
It's really great. Questions, anyone?
Christine, I've got a question for you. You mentioned a limit of 1,500.
Mhm.
Is that a technical limit, or that sounds like a Dunbar number to me?
It's,
It's a perfect level of,
Yeah.
village or something like that.
no, it's not a Dunbar number. What it is actually the biggest map we've ever made, and it was the first maps we made in Kumu or in sumApp. Well, we had been making these maps before sumApp. Were 1,250 members, and that they were fairly dense networks of 1,250 members, and Kumu would bog down. If your internet connection wasn't lightning fast, you wouldn't even be able to load Kumu because it would take so long to load that much data. So when we built sumApp, we thought, okay, well, we can't, it would be rude to allow people to gather more data than can actually load in any tool that exists. So we just sort of thought, well, if it's 1,200 and it's in our network in that experience, and we did a similar map like that 3 times, we just sort of said, okay, that one's fairly densely connected. Let's just cap it at 1,500 and, we'll see what happens in the future. And so we could change that, but until the mapping software can handle a lot more, it doesn't seem useful to change that.
Has anybody got close to 1,500 yet that you know of?
I still think we are probably at almost double of the next biggest maps. I don't know of any maps of more than, aside from the ones the 3 that we did that I'm referring to that were 1,200-ish, the next biggest maps I'm aware of are more like 800 people. So if anybody has a bigger map than that, I'd like to know about it. But yeah, I don't think anyone's gotten that big yet.
One more thing I wanted to share, which I failed to mention. It's really interesting when you combine the connections and then the different assets or geographies or kind of particular information that these groups are bringing. So we have all the connections visible now. And I've just then isolated the groups who are working in Asia and the Pacific region. That's a really interesting way to then dig down on kind of smaller and smaller boundaries and see how work is happening across a particular region. And when that happens, the complexity of all the different connections across the map becomes simplified, and you can really see with more detail what's happening in a particular region, or you could do the same under a particular advocacy priority or groups who just have, in a particular type of organization or just in the particular cohort. And so you can see really clearly here, there is actually decent connectivity of the 5 of the 6 different groups, but in large part, kind of thanks to this central node here, who's collaborating with 2 and communicating with 1, and then there's this isolated node over here. So this would be a kind of right place to weave the network, to connect people together who are working in the same region but are already connected with one another, or closing the triangle. So looking at the 2 groups who are connected with one particular group but aren't connected with one another, connecting them together. And you can see too that these lines have arrows, and that's because on the survey it was this person who said that they're collaborating with this other group, and it wasn't reciprocated. That other group did not say that they're collaborating with this person. That's interesting. It's not uncommon. Because when you're surveying organizations or networks, as I said, there are a number of different people, they might not have visibility into all the different work that they're doing with another organization or group. But that's a really important piece of information, because then you can go back to the group who didn't have that information or wasn't aware of that collaboration and understand how your organization is actually working with this person. Your organization might be so big that you just don't even know how you're working with these other groups. And strengthen the connections that way. So just wanted to show, combining the sort of the assets or the geographies, et cetera, with the connections is a really useful way of digging in.
Yeah, just a principle that you're sort of pointing out is when we first started this work, we were using social network analysis tools that weren't interactive online, so that basically somebody, an expert, somebody like David would look at the map and have to make executive decisions about what's interesting to highlight, what's interesting to show, and they couldn't possibly find all the ways of filtering the map that are relevant for everybody in the network. And so that was from the very beginning, a frustration for me was I wanted people to be able to dig themselves, and I wanted to help people learn how to take this big, scary, messy, can of worms like thing and filter it down so that it's meaningful to things that I can actually do right now, like simple, small things like learning how to, find the signal in the noise of the complexity. And so that's what David has enabled his network to do here with us, with these filters and that sort of thing.
That's a really important point, because when I'm actually working directly with a network, I have a lot more understanding of who these different groups are and how they're working, and then I can, I'd be able to kind of probably more accurately show those different views. But the people who are working in the network, who are actually doing the work, they have a way better understanding than I ever will about what this work is and what information is interesting. And so whenever I'm doing work like this, I always make it a priority a big part of it is training the people who are working in the network, supporting the network and working in the network of how to use this tool so that they can really dig in and find those insights that would have eluded me.
Yeah. So Rebecca has a question. And Rebecca, do you want to just say it out loud? Oh,
Yeah, sure.
go ahead. I didn't get it at first, but now I think I do, but go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I'm continuing to clarify from my own understanding of the costs and benefits of going from, well, not in this case, going from kumo back to sumApp as Christine's early slide depicted today, or as I just heard in this presentation, staying in kumo for the presentation and analyses of the results.
Either way is fine. The reason I decided to share via the kumo presentation is because this network wanted to wait a bit until they had enough survey results to share back the information. So if it was integrated, if the map then was visible in sumApp right at the beginning, the people who filled out the survey first would see a map that didn't have information from any other groups and might not go back to it. Whereas this particular network was interested in capturing as much information as could, which meant following up, doing some follow-up, kind of because a lot of these groups weren't very well intimately connected with the network yet. It took some follow-up and then being able to share it kind of all at once in a package.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And then
but I will say, I think in some cases it is really helpful to have the map visible right when people fill it out, especially with sort of an opt-in map where you're not identifying the list of participants. Yeah. They're actually opting into the map because then seeing the map is also an incentive to fill it out or to go back into your information and make it more complete.
And that's doing that in sumApp. In other words, making the sumApp results immediately apparent to users. Yeah,
totally.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And Rebecca, do you want to say your next question?
Oh, I was just wondering, I suspect there is a way to filter on, say, one kind of advocacy priority in one geographic area. But
yeah, no, you're totally right. Yeah, you can combine these, and that's a really nice part. So I don't know if it's going to work because I haven't planned this particular one out. All right, so yeah, these two groups are working globally under prevention, adaptation of risk, prevention of pandemic. That makes sense. So yeah, you can combine them, and fortunately they're collaborating, so that's good.
Yeah, that's neat.
Mm-hmm.
And Daniel, you had a question. Do you want to ask it out loud? Do you want me to read it? Go ahead.
Yes. I was curious about why, because David mentioned that he is training the people in the network on how to use it. And in the answer before, you mentioned a part of it, I think, but I'm really curious about how you structure that and what the strategy is.
Yeah, for training them, if it's somebody who's really new to this work, in almost every case, I will work with them to figure out the questions and what's the type of information we want to capture and how is this going to be used. So really kind of the end case of the how and the so what with them. Then I will help to set up the sumApp piece. I'll set up the kumo piece and deliver for them, but then be able to go back and walk through kind of each step that was done through the process. You know, having actually a working map is really useful in that way. And then the next time when they do a follow-up, then really them taking the lead and me kind of being a support partner. Just if they have technical questions, I can help, but they're really then taking the lead. And my goal is always that they're able to carry this work forward and not be dependent on me in the future.
Okay. So you also ask them about criteria or things that they would like to see in the map or know about the map. So you can include that in the next questionnaire.
Yeah, well, I work with them from the very beginning to understand what's the type of information that they want to capture, because, you know, not being intimately connected with this network, I don't know what that is. And I also don't know which groups should be surveyed. I just know how to structure the map and build the map. And so I really partner with them from the beginning to understand the type of information and going back and forth and developing the survey. Most everybody understands, you know, what a good survey looks like and the type of information they're trying to capture. But it's the, you know, kind of the technical aspects that they need some support on. So they really take the lead on what's the information to capture, and I support with suggesting connectivity scales. But it's really custom to every network. You know, as I said, that connectivity scale, we've used it in a lot of different situations, but folks will want to kind of modify it slightly to focus on different things. Or if it's a network of individuals, they might want to focus on a different thing too. So, you know, really, they're the lead on what's the type of information we want to capture, and then I just help to shape it in a way that makes sense for the map.
Okay, thanks.
Of course.
Anyone else? Other questions? They can be any kind of questions. So, anyone?
David, actually, I just have one last question. I'm curious. So, I don't know if you mentioned earlier, but have you shared this back with everyone in the network, and what's the type of feedback you get from them about interacting with with this interface, with the dashboard? What kinds of information they have found really useful? What do they want to get out of it? I've always, and the reason I'm asking is I feel like a lot of our clients are always asking for systems maps, but never really know what they want to get out of it.
Yeah.
So I'm curious how you've seen people use this information.
Totally. I can't speak to this specific map because it's just now being shared with the network. It's brand new, but I can speak to other maps that are really similar. A couple things. Number one, I think actually presenting it, verbally walking people through it at the time of a network call or convening is really key. I mean, even if it just takes 5 or 10 minutes to actually walk through it with them step by step, how to use it is a lot more likely to be used than if you just kind of send out the link or send out written instructions or whatnot. So that's a big one. Number two, I think producing just like a quick 5-minute or less kind of screen share video of you walking through it that I upload to YouTube. That's really key too. So just again, instead of like written instructions tutorial, a video tutorial really goes a long way. And then 3, using the kumo presenter mode, it has instructions also on the left of what they should be looking for, and it kind of then walks them through step by step of how to use it. And in the kumo presentation mode, you can also then they'll click the next button and it'll shift the view of the map too, so you can focus on different things. You're really walking them through it. And groups that the participants in a network who are really using it find most helpful the sort of asset map type information. In my opinion, what the other groups are bringing to the table, how they might be able to support their work. So it's kind of using it like a network directory in a lot of ways. And that's really useful for really large networks. One recently was 300 different groups working in the Willamette region to improve the health of the Willamette River. And 300 different organizations or individuals who are working in this space. There's no way that I would know be able to hold all that complexity in my mind. So having an asset map to make sense of that and find the groups who are working on a particular issue in this little part of the region is how they really use it. The connectivity side of it is more useful, I think, for network coordinators or weavers, the people who are actively supporting the cultivation of the network, understand how people are connected, how we can support weaving, and so forth. In some cases, even when there's real privacy concerns about that connectivity data, when that's kind of really sensitive, sometimes we'll even separate that out so that just the network organizers have access to that connectivity information, and the participants who are filling out the survey know that that's going to be private and not shared, so they can be honest about that. And the network participants will just have the asset map part of it. But the connectivity side, I really think of more for network weavers and coordinators, and then the asset map side is really for participants themselves to dig in as a directory.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
For sure.
I'm going to address a couple that are in the chat. So Mark has a question about what training does sumApp offer to new users? Mark, we have a whole lot of self-directed learning resources in the knowledge base and lots of videos, and but we also have a Slack team, so you can go on Slack and ask questions. We don't have any kind of structured, organized like classes, but you can also hire either Tim or me or both of us, depending on what you're looking for help with, for coaching. So I would be doing the sort of process setup, social piece of it, vision piece of it, sense making piece of it, and Tim would be is a really great coach at the especially the kumo, the sumApp setup, and the kumo, your data and kumo stuff. So reach out if you want that kind of help, and join the community where we all sort of share learning together, the Slack community, and then also just these sessions. So that's the answer. Does that do? Wait, Mark, is that good for you? Not seeing Mark. Okay. And then let's see, Daniel, combined survey with LinkedIn data. Actually, no, LinkedIn closed down. We used to use LinkedIn before we built sumApp and got a lot of flack for using LinkedIn, because there are a lot of communities that don't use LinkedIn and they just looked invisible on maps. But for LinkedIn closed down its API, so you can't actually pull that kind of data. You can pull, anyway, it's complicated, but bottom line is no. If you're using, you could manually cobble it together, be a big messy thing. But if you're using the live link from sumApp to go into Kumu, that's the data. There's one data source, it's read only, and you can't combine data sources in Kumu. So the simple answer that I should have just said was no.
I can take the last two questions here.
Okay.
Unfortunately, no, sorry, the asset map for the river groups is not public. That's private. I will, though, however, when my book launches in October, be developing a couple of walkthroughs of how to create an asset map, and then also how to conduct a social network analysis that will give examples and even the code that you can use in Kumu for that. So if you're interested in that, you can reach out to me or sign up for a newsletter on our website, converge.net, and you'll be updated about that. This is a map of mostly organizations, but also some people, and you'll see some individuals' faces. In some cases, that's because they didn't read the instructions, which is very common, and uploaded a picture of their face instead of a picture of their organization. So very common that people don't fully read the instructions. Something to be aware of. Let's see. Curious best practices on engaging and ensuring folks consistently reply to the surveys to ensure this data is dynamic versus static. For sure. Well, number one, showing them the map either soon after they're complete their survey or immediately after is really helpful. Prompt, because they see that there's something there and it's important for them to go update their information. I think sumApp, though, just as a tool is really valuable in that people can go back into their same survey link that they're sent and update their information at any time in the future. So the hope is also with this map that then when it's shared back out to folks, there's also a prompt. It's shared to the full network, there's a prompt. If you didn't fill out your survey, go back to your link and you can update your information at any time. That's important. And then also just reducing the survey burden, making it a simple survey that doesn't take very long is pretty key to that as well.
Thanks, David. That was really great. So we're at the top of the hour. So we'll do we have a quick goodbye ritual, which is if we all unmute ourselves and at the count of, I'll count down from 3, 2, 1. So those of you who are going to participate, unmute yourselves now. And when we get to 1, we'll just all give each other our blessings and greetings for the day or the evening for going on forward with your path. And then whoever wants to stick around, just don't jump off, and then we'll continue the conversation after that. So everybody who's ready to do this, counting down, 3, 2, 1. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, David.
Bye.
Thank you,
David.
Good to see you.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
That was really good.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Great
you.
presentation. Yeah.
Thank you.